Thank you, Senator Robertson. I'm going to call this meeting of the Senate Public Safety Committee to order. We're going to begin with a blessing. Our very own Senator Cardin Summers will open us up.
May we pray. Our most kind and gracious Heavenly Father, again we come to you thanking you for this wonderful day you've given us to live in. We thank you for the blessings you send our way. We ask you to continue to lead, guide, protect us. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen.
Thank you. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to have two bills on the calendar today. We're going to have Senate Bill 479 and Senate Bill 505. We'll begin with Senator Hatchett, Governor's floor leader, to bring forward Senate Bill 479. And we'll just verify we have the right LC number with you, Senator, if that's okay. In our folders, we have LC 480505EC. Is that correct?
That is correct.
All right. Please take it away.
Thank you, members of the committee. Today I bring Senate Bill 479. This bill has to do with firearms in the possession of felons. This bill takes actions to ensure that convicted felons are held properly accountable when illegally possessing or attempting to possess firearms or weapons. Now, I've always fought to protect the Second Amendment for law-abiding Georgians, but felons who have relinquished that right and continue to violate the law must receive justice. This legislation would ensure that happens and further protect the safety of our citizens. Notably, the courts have read our current law to mean that even if a convicted felon is in possession of an arsenal of weapons, he or she can only be charged with one single count of possession. And this runs contrary to logic and runs contrary to the intent of the Georgia legislature in enacting this originally. It also runs contrary to how this law has been interpreted in the past prior to the Supreme Court decision, which is Coates v. State. This was decided in August of 2017, and one thing that the Supreme Court of Georgia does is they're heavy in textualism, meaning that they want to construe the statute of the bill as plainly as possible. And the issue that they had was the word any, A-N-Y, any. And what they said in their opinion is that in enacting OCGA 1611-131, which is the code section we're operating under, the Georgia Assembly sought to keep guns out of the hands of those individuals who, by their prior conduct, had demonstrated that they may not possess a firearm without being a threat to society. And then they go on to say, while it may make sense to punish a defendant who possesses two guns more harshly than a defendant who possesses only one gun, the General Assembly has not made clear and unambiguous language provided that the possession of multiple firearms authorizes multiple prosecutions. And so that's what this bill does. It's a very short bill, but what it does, if you look on the second page there, lines 23 through 25, it says, for any violation of subsection B or B1 of this code section involving multiple firearms or weapons, such firearm or weapon connected to such violation shall constitute a separate offense. So this is, I think, appealing to the Supreme Court justices and their commitment to textualism. It challenges us a little bit more to make sure that we are clear in how we write our laws and how we write our bills, and make sure that our intent is clear. And I think this leaves no doubt as to what our intent is. Now, going off of this, there are companion bills that are similar to this in the House right now. They're not dealing with possession of firearms, but they're dealing with possession of child pornography, and they're dealing with child molestation. So right now, the way this statute is being construed, someone who is in possession of one image of child pornography or 1,000, they can only be charged once. And so we're moving this bill in the Senate. That bill's being moved in the House, and hopefully we can get this cleared up so judges can apply the appropriate punishment for violators. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Senator Hatchett, for that exemplary detailed explanation of the bill, and thank you for carrying this on behalf of Governor Kemp, who is clearly not going to tolerate violence and crime in the state of Georgia and is going after it. We appreciate his leadership. I do have a question from, I believe that's Senator Summers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Hatchett, I like this bill. I've got a little concern with it. Just want to make sure clarification. I had a sheriff call me from one of my counties, and there is a felon that works at a plantation there. He trains dogs. He has to be in possession of a shotgun. We classify firearms, shotguns, handguns, etc. He says, he said, I could see how this could possibly cause him issues because he has to shoot the gun while he's training dogs when they're working for quail, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Would you please elaborate what you think this may or may not do to him? And that's just a concern.
That's an interesting concern. My interpretation of the statute, and I'm not going to give my legal opinion, so you can't bill me for this, or I can't bill you for this. That's probably more appropriate. But it sounds to me like if he is a convicted felon, he should not be having a gun to begin with, or weapon at all.
Yeah, why don't you pull the microphone there?
Follow up, please. He doesn't take the guns home with him, obviously. You know that. But while he is on the plantation grounds, that's part of his job. And they're trying to rehabilitate the dude, and he's been very good about what he's doing, but they're trying to make sure that he's doing his job. And he just said, I want to make sure he can't get in trouble. And I said, I can't answer that for you.
I think just from the statute and the intent of the statute, I do believe he can get in trouble regardless of the changes that we make. The only thing that would change is that if he had 2 shotguns, he'll get 2 counts instead of 1 for what he has now.
I'm going to let Senator Robertson weigh in. I think he's got some subject matter expertise on that.
Just a little bit, and I see my prosecutorial friend in the back there. The individual, if law enforcement were called onto the property and the individual was in possession of the shotgun and it was determined that they were a convicted felon without being pardoned by the governor, that the individual would be guilty of being a convicted felon in possession of a firearm. I know there are other devices made, other contraptions that are made that give the same sound of a shotgun in training animals, and I would encourage your sheriff to encourage that particular business owner maybe to obtain one of these, because there are no exceptions as far as workplace. There are certain places felons can't work because by working there they would possess a firearm, which would be in violation of Georgia law, is my understanding.
I believe you're right. Got a question from Senator Kim Jackson.
Yeah, so thank you, Senator Hatchett. I just want to make sure I am reading this correctly. So the word shall is present in your new language on line 24. So does this remove all judge discretion as it relates to how they want to treat someone who may have been caught with multiple guns?
It does. I mean, this is a mandatory minimum, a period of 5 years. As far as removing all judges' discretion, this is a mandatory minimum.
Right. So, but with your bill, as you've had it constructed here, it is a mandatory minimum for 5 years for the first gun. But now is this saying that because you shall constitute it as a separate offense, if the person has 3 guns, the judge can no longer use his or her discretion, but they would have to sentence them to 15 years?
I believe they are concurrent sentences, yes.
So this is essentially a tougher on crime measure that you're enacting here?
Yes.
Or seeking to enact?
All right, Senator Robertson, one more time.
My reading of that, and help me if I understand it right, Senator, you could have 7 counts. If you're a convicted felon and you are caught with 7 firearms, you would have 7 counts of being a convicted felon in possession of a firearm, correct?
Correct.
The judge could sentence you to 5 years on the first count, and then he could sentence you consecutively to 5 years on each other firearm, which would mean 5 years per, or he could do it concurrent to where each one would be 5 years, but because he sentenced you concurrently, you would actually do 5 years.
And that's a question I'd like to refer to some of my backup that I have here, just to make sure I'm testifying appropriately.
Yeah,
I can help y'all on that.
yeah. And Pete, what I'm trying to say is it doesn't say that it has to be consecutive. Is that not, is that correct?
Let's assume that we stop a convicted felon, he has 4 firearms in his car. That'd be a single transaction. So when you talk about a second or subsequent conviction, you can't take one transaction, him being stopped on one day, and say those are consecutive convictions and then stack him on that, okay? Not only that, just recently in State versus Langley, the Supreme Court said, even though it says shall be sentenced, you can still probate those cases. These are not mandatory minimums.
And I think we had that discussion on misdemeanor charges, Mr. Chairman, the other day, where if you get a high and aggravated, the sentence is more severe than a normal misdemeanor, but that does not take away the authority of the judge to be able to offer probated sentences.
That's correct.
And other programs to offset mandatory prison time.
That
or
is
jail
correct.
time.
And I'm Pete Scandalakis. I'm with the
thank you. I was just
Prosecuting
gonna ask.
Attorneys Council of Georgia.
Thank you, Pete. Other questions for the author? Okay, we've got a sign-up sheet here. Let's see here. Mr. Weaver, it doesn't say which bill you want here. Is it this bill? Yes, sir. All right, why don't you come on down?
Thank you, Chairman Albers, members of the Senate Public Safety Committee. First, I apologize for my faux pas. I thought this was the only bill on the agenda. I apologize. Just a scrivener concern that I have for this legislative measure on line 24 of the bill. It says it speaks to firearms or weapons. Trouble is, under Georgia Code Section 1611-125.1, and paragraph 5 of that, weapons is a defined term. Weapons means handgun or knife. And that's applicable to the entirety of the part, which this code section is part of the Part 3. So my concern is that this would impermissibly insert knives into this mix, and I don't know if that's the legislature's posture under this language. I don't want that to be included. It's never been the General Assembly's position that a convicted felon be dispossessed of all weapons. It's just firearms. And because these are different terms and these have different definitions, I would just posit to the committee, if the chair deems it appropriate and if the author is so amenable, to just simply delete the words "or weapons" where they both appear twice under line 24, such that it just says firearm and each firearm possessed. Because, like I said, weapons is a defined term, and if you put weapons into that, I believe it opens the door to judicial interpretation that could put this back into the mix of, did the General Assembly intend knives to be part of this code section? And I beg to reason that that's not the intent of the legislature.
Well, thank you, Mr. Weaver. We think that's an important point. Why don't you take a seat for a second? I'm going to look at the bill's author. Would you like to come back up and just address that specific issue while we're together?
Yeah, and we always thank you for bringing up issues that you find. It's always a pleasure to see in these committees. I'm happy to put forth, or if a member of the committee would put forth that amendment to strike the "or weapons" section, because this legislation is designed specifically for firearms.
Okay, that'd be great. Well, thank you. We're going to do that at the end, but very good catch, Mr. Weaver. Thank you, Senator. We appreciate that. Okay, next up, Ms. Maisie Lynn.
Thank you, Chairman. And I know I have a new last name this session. It's Girton, just like curtain.
That's
with
why
a
I just said
G.
Maisie Lynn.
I know, and you're not the first. That's become the, which I don't mind. Maisie Lynn's unique enough. Happy to be known that way, too. As bills like Senate Bill 479 and the companion bill that Senator Hatchett mentioned, House Bill 1188, redefine units of prosecution into smaller and smaller pieces, in this case, from an arsenal to an individual gun. What this effectively does is shifts the sentencing power from the judges to the prosecutors. The same thing holds true when you impose mandatory minimum sentences. This happens because each unit of prosecution, in this case a gun, carries its own potential sentence. So the charging decision, which is made by the prosecutor, assuming a conviction results, that will dictate the number of sentences, bless you, that are required to be issued or meted out. And as was discussed, in this particular bill, it's not as pernicious as it could be because there is not a mandatory minimum requirement, nor is there a consecutive sentencing requirement. But should either of those things happen to this particular code section in the future, that would amplify this problem that I'm bringing to your attention of having shifted the sentencing power from the court to the state. Prosecutors are, by definition, biased, just like I am when I'm in the courtroom, biased. And they generally make their charging decisions with only the benefit of a police investigation. Their charging decisions are void of any information that might be brought forth by the defense, by my constituents, in mitigation, or in providing context, or any other types of information that might have otherwise influenced their charging decision. When, as here with Senate Bill 479, each and every gun the prosecutor decides to charge a person with possessing would then carry its own distinct sentence. And the judge, who is the neutral party in the courtroom, the judge is meant to be objectively unbiased, neutral, arbiter, is now limited in her ability to exercise equity and to impose a sentence that fits the totality of the circumstances. We elect judges to this role of neutral arbiter, but with every narrowing of these units of prosecution, you're moving us toward a world where the jury is not only the fact finder, but also the de facto sentencer. Those men and women are not privy to our sentencing schemes, the sentencing schemes that are available and or required under law. They cannot possibly make an informed, much less an equitable decision about how a case should unfold in their fact finding if they don't have that information about the sentencing. It's the judge's job to do that. The most intellectually honest alternative that we can offer you as a solution here is that rather than charging by the unit of prosecution, change the sentencing range. Increase the maximum incarceration length that's available for a judge to sentence from. The feds handle these cases just like we do today. They do not charge individual guns, but they have adequate sentencing guidelines available to the courts so that the judges can issue an equitable sentence. I'm not here to tell you that I think a single gun case is the same as a 5-gun case, is the same as a 10-gun case. I'm not. But if the problem is you want the judge to make a reasonable, informed, equitable decision, then hamstringing them by determining that the number of guns should be the basis for measure is just, in our view, not the most reasonable nor the most appropriate way to do this, because you're abdicating that responsibility to the prosecutor, taking it away from the court where it belongs.
Thank you, Ms. Girton. I will get a question here from Senator Robertson.
Ms. Girton, I'm trying to understand, I guess, some of your terminology.
Okay.
As an officer, he or she discovers a suspect with 7 firearms, or we'll say 5 firearms. Then this law here, changed in Title 16, is the guide to that officer as to how they charge. And they charge, and then that case goes to the prosecutor, and then the prosecutor makes the determination as far as if the officer followed all the rules of law. The DAs, investigators review the officer's case file to make sure that he or she conducted everything the way it should have been conducted. And then they present the case before the judge, and the judge, also using the guidelines placed within Title 16, if the person is adjudicated and determined to be guilty on each charge, then the judge is the sole individual who determines the sentencing based on the guidelines. So I've never in a courtroom, I've heard recommendations for sentencing from prosecutors and from defense attorneys.
Absolutely.
But never have I seen a prosecutor sentence anyone. And then I certainly believe that most jurors, after voir dire and all the other painful things they must experience to serve their civic duty, I believe it would be somewhat of, and I absolutely know this was not your intent, it would be somewhat insulting to say that a man or woman of the community, after being educated by the prosecutor to what Georgia law is, and being educated by the defense attorney as to what Georgia law is, and the interpretation of intent and whatever the individual did that led to the violation of the law, that these jurors would have the necessary understanding to hand down what would be a balanced verdict. And my concern, if we were to switch over to federal guidelines, and you help me, I think if we go to somewhat of a model of federal guidelines, I think everybody does about 90% of the sentence of the time that they receive in federal, because federal focuses more on months than years. And, you know, they require that you do almost every day, if you will, where in the state of Georgia, some people find it as something to be ashamed of. I find it something more that we can be proud of, the fact that we have more people on probation than we do incarcerated when you start looking, because we are a state that realizes that just locking somebody away for 90% of their sentence is not always the necessary solution to trying to help an individual out who made a poor choice. So I'm a little concerned, because in your argument and with my experience within the criminal justice system, I've never experienced in a courtroom where a prosecutor, no matter how skilled he or she may be, ever took the authority away from a black robe sitting up there carrying that heavy weight on his or her shoulders to pass down sentencing on another human being.
Okay, a lot wrapped up in there. Can I try to address each piece?
Well, no, it's one single piece. I want you to explain to me when and if a DA has ever mandated a sentence through a judge.
And then respectfully, Senator, that was not my testimony, not that they mandate a sentence.
I think your testimony was they determine the prison time is basically what you said.
What I said was, when they're, and I will read it to you.
Yes, ma'am,
Because it's
please.
exactly what I said. I read it here. Sorry, gonna scroll. That if each unit of prosecution, here again, carries a potential sentence, the charging decision, assuming conviction, dictates the number of sentences that are required to be issued.
But
You are shifting, I'm sorry.
go ahead. I apologize. You're going to
So
we're shifting.
So as you redefine these units of prosecution into
right.
smaller and smaller pieces, the sentencing power shifts from the judges to the prosecutors.
Okay,
That's
so,
your concern, I
so
think.
no, yeah. So you're shifting judges. This doesn't take the judge's authority away to give probation. It doesn't give the judges, take away the judge's authority to do concurrent.
It doesn't, you're right, at this point.
So if somebody is convicted of 20 counts, and each count carries a maximum of 5 years,
Right.
the judge could find them on each charge 5 years concurrent, which
Today.
means that individual would do 5 years
Right.
on all of those charges, not a day beyond 5 years.
That's right.
So I think, and then the judge has discretion that he or she can go with each sentence and boxcar it. They can do 5 years for everyone to run consecutive.
They can,
They can.
under this bill.
So, exactly. And I think if anything, it's exactly that way now on other crimes where individuals are convicted, and judges have the opportunity to choose concurrent, consecutive, whether they can offer probation, other types of programs. So I don't see where this legislation, in the way that it is written, alters the judge's ability to make those non-biased, very clean decisions based on the facts of the case.
The difference is
Okay.
that today, if you are charged with, let's use your 5-gun example, you are, and this is slightly different than I think, let me just say, if you're charged with 5 counts of possession of a firearm by a convicted felon, the indictment would say that. It could potentially have 5 individual counts. You could be convicted of all 5 counts. But under our law today, which is part of what Senator Hatchett was describing, as a matter of sentencing, it would merge into one sentence. You could only get the one sentence for the 5 individual convictions. It's not that you, so as of today, that's what's happening.
And this now gives
And
flexibility.
I'll defer to my friends to make sure that everyone agrees that
and-
today, if you're convicted of 5 possessions, if you're a convicted felon who's convicted of possessing 5 firearms, you may be charged with each individual count, but as a matter of sentencing, it's going to merge. You're only going to get the 1 sentence. And under the sentencing scheme, if it's your first offense, you could be sentenced 1 to 10. If it's your second or subsequent offense, it's 5 to, I think, still 5 to 10. And then if it's a forcible felony, it's a mandatory, not mandatory 5, but it's a 5. It could still could be probated, to your point. And then there's another subsection too around purchasing, which is B1, which is also referenced in the bill. It's a different scheme. All to say that at this stage of the game, the maximum penalty is 10 years under subsection B. Under this bill, if the prosecutor chooses to, again, charge all 5, then that person is subject to 5 individual sentences. That's not true today. So it now becomes, my point is maybe nuanced, but if the prosecutor decides to go forward on that same 5-count indictment under 479, under Senate Bill 479, now the judge has to issue a sentence on each individual conviction. It could still, to your point, be 1 running concurrent for 5. It could be 5 running concurrent. It could be 1 stacked up. It could be 10 stacked up. Just depends on how those 5, the judge does absolutely have the power to do that. If the DA, though, decides for some reason there's some problem with 2 of the guns, I can't come up with what that could be, but let's say when the person's arrested, they have 5 guns in their possession, but for whatever reason the DA doesn't feel like they can go forward on 2 of them, they only charge the 3. Or, so now we're back to, now we're at a point where, this is my point, is that the prosecutor is now in the position, because they make the charging decision, they decide how many units of prosecution they are going to try to get a conviction on. And by making each gun a distinct unit of prosecution, you are essentially setting the court up to, assuming they're all, all the convictions hold, that foreshadows what sentencing is going to have to happen.
Maisie, thank you for your comments. So we always appreciate your input, even
Yes.
when we don't agree with them.
Well,
Other questions from the committee?
I'm afraid from the questions that it's not that
Maisie.
you don't agree, it's that you don't,
Maisie,
that I'm not
Maisie.
explaining it well enough. But
Hang on a second. Hang on. We're going to have a little order, everybody. So the way the committee process works, just to remind everybody who's here today, is we recognize people, we let them talk, and then we go back and forth and recognize them individually. So let's keep some order. We'll have one final question on this from Senator Robertson.
I think maybe where we're missing each other, and you may have went a little deeper into it on your last, where you were talking about currently under current Georgia law, based on those who had previously been convicted of forcible felonies and all this other kind of stuff, where you're running into that problem. But isn't it true today that if you're charged with 5 burglaries, you can be charged with each burglary individual, and then as the convictions come down, then the judge makes the determination of the sentencing of each burglary, where he can or she can, in fact, do consecutive, concurrent, or probate based on the current laws related to burglary?
the answer to your question is yes. Can a judge sentence on 5 distinct burglaries today? Yes. Burglaries are distinct from gun possession. Possessing
Yes, they
5
are.
guns at one time is one occasion. It is one instance. Breaking into 5 different buildings is 5 different distinct instances. I'm not sure instances is not the best term of art that could come to my brain right now. So I guess for me, those are not it's not as much of an analog situation, because you're talking about a single instance of possessing 5 guns versus 5 instances of breaking into.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we're going to leave some of the philosophical
That's fine.
conversations for after the meeting. Any other questions for Ms. Maisie Lynn Girton? Okay, thank you so much. Pete, you came up earlier. Do you want to speak again? Very briefly. Come on down.
Very briefly, because I think Floor Leader Hatchett has covered this very well, and I think I've explained some of the misunderstandings. This is just a matter of public policy. When you have a convicted felon, and that convicted felon has 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, you want to be able to charge the appropriate offense. It's no different than owning a chop shop. If you own a chop shop and you show up and the owner has 5 stolen cars, that owner can be charged with 5 stolen cars. This is a public safety policy. This is to keep the people of Georgia safe, that we don't want people who have violated the law and have not shown the ability to be trusted with firearms, that they cannot own multiple firearms. And let me just say this, my experience as a prosecutor that I've had almost 40 years now, don't have as much hair as Senator Robinson, but I'm getting there. But my experience has been, a lot of times, particularly in gang cases, we have these houses where you have convicted felons and there are multiple firearms in there. And this is what the bill is trying to get at. Those convicted felons who have not been able to follow the law, being able to cache firearms. It's that simple. And if there are any questions, I'll be glad to answer any questions.
I have a question from Senator Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Skandalakis. I always appreciate your insights. So currently, it's illegal to cache firearms if you're a felon.
Correct.
Is that correct?
But you can only be charged with 1 count. So let's just say that a police officer has a search warrant and goes into a convicted felon's home, and that convicted felon has an AR-15, a .357 Magnum, a Taurus pistol, and let's just say that person for some reason has traded for firearms. That all merges into 1 count, and so it's just 1 count. And this does not eliminate the ability of a judge to have sentencing discretion. The judge can sentence that person to probation, to prison time, a split sentence, and even if that person's been convicted before, the judge still has that discretion. But that's correct.
Sure. So I guess I also want to be clear. Now, if the weapons were found in 2 different places, would that be 2 different counts?
You would have to show possession, and it has to be constructive possession or direct possession. So it has to be one of the 2. If I can't show possession, in other words, if we show up, and we've had that happen before, execute a search warrant or go to a place, and you can't prove that that person actually possessed or constructively possessed, you can't make that case. And so let's just say I'm executing a search warrant and there's a gun in an open area where this person, well, no, let's just say it's in a particular bedroom that this person didn't have access to. You couldn't charge that as a possession by a convicted felon because you can't prove possession. So you have to prove actual or constructive possession.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, seeing no more questions, thank you for your
Thank you.
testimony. Next up, Mr. Melvin with the GBI.
Good afternoon, Senators. My name is John Melvin, Assistant Director of the Georgia Bureau of Investigations. Prior to that, I had the honor of being a prosecutor for 25 years, serving the state of Georgia. To address 2 issues, this is still going through the Supreme Court. As of January 19th, 2022, we had another case called Johnson versus the state, 2022 Georgia 5 Lexus. And they're still continuing the Coates theory of possession. But Senator, to address your question about whether or not there's multiple firearms in the house, what Johnson says, following up on the logic of Coates, is it's the simultaneous possession. So if I have one in my bedroom and one in my kitchen, that's simultaneous possession. I can only be sentenced 1 time. But where we are seeing this on the Bureau side is that when we're getting to the gang houses, we are seeing caches of homes that have multiple firearms. And by changing the statute as submitted with the exception of the word weapon, we give our people and our prosecutors a lot bigger hammer to address this critical issue. One other matter. We don't want to go to the federal guidelines, because let me tell you what happens. Just like with money laundering, where at $10,000 you have to report it, we have our defendants making transactions in the amount of $9,500. Or just like trafficking requires 28 ounces, we have defendants knowingly only transporting 27 ounces. So it's easy to avoid the sentencing guidelines of the feds, and this right here, There is not a single prosecutor in this state that is in charge of sentencing. We all know that. It's judges and judges alone. Prosecutors are in charge of charging. We do not take away any discretion from the judges. Thank you.
Director, you have a question from Senator Jackson.
So, Director, in your great wisdom that we all bring to this place, do you believe that this bill will result in gang members no longer caching weapons or guns specifically?
I don't believe that it'll have an immediate effect. It's going to have to catch up. And one of the bases of justice is proportionality. So, and that's been from the time that mankind has started writing laws. So if I'm possessing 1,000 firearms at one time, I deserve to be punished more than somebody who has a single firearm at the scene of a crime. And once the word starts getting out, the more guns we have, the more we're going to go down. I pray that it's going to have a beneficial effect.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Okay, seeing no more questions, thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Hatchett, if you want to come back to the podium and make any closing remarks, and then we'll entertain a potential amendment and motion.
Well, first off, I want to thank those that have came to help me out a little bit on this bill, and thank the committee for your time. The only closing remarks is I would, if someone would be so kind to offer that amendment, striking the word "or weapons,"
Yeah.
we would be in favor of that amendment.
Thank you. Appreciate your testimony. I want you to stay right there, and I'm going to recognize Vice Chairman Harper for what we're going to call the Weaver Amendment.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To offer the Weaver Amendment, I'll offer an amendment on line 24 to strike the words "or weapons," and also strike the word "or weapon."
We have that on our Legislative Council. Okay. Everybody understand that amendment? Is there a second for that amendment? Second from Senator Jackson. Is there any further discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor of the amendment, please say aye. Aye. All opposed, please say no. Now we have a new committee substitute. I will be open for someone to make a motion. So moved. I got a motion from Senator Summers and a second from Senator Lee Anderson. Any further discussion on the amended bill? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, please say no. No. All right, so we have 2 noes for Senator C and Senator Jackson. Thank you. Now, if you're familiar with the chairman of the Rules Committee, he could be difficult to get through, but I'm sure you'll
Try to
work your
call his
magic.
office, see if I can get a meeting.
How long has he served in the General Assembly, do you know?
Almost 22 years, if I'm not mistaken.
Very good.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Appreciate it. Okay, next bill. We're going to hear Senate Bill 505. Senator Robertson, you want to just present from your seat there?
If you don't mind, Mr. Chairman, I would.
I do not mind.
I would appreciate that.
I'll just give everybody just a moment to clear the room who needs to leave. Senator, I appreciate you coming to me. I think we talked about that earlier. Yes. Senator, we talked about that earlier. Okay, Senator Robertson.
I guarantee you this bill is nowhere near as controversial or upsetting as the last bill may have been to some. Basically, SB 505 discusses Tcpr training, which, as you know, in the state of Georgia, we get around 15 million 911 calls every year. And the vast majority of these 911 calls, you may be surprised to know, are because of medical conditions, health concerns, injuries, car accidents, and things of that nature. So we have a tremendous team of men and women who 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, man these 911 centers throughout our state and do an incredible job. But we can always find areas that we need to improve in. And so what Senate Bill 505 does is it requires that communications officers complete training in the delivery of high quality telephone CPR in addition to basic training. The bill, not only with the Tcpr, but additionally, this bill requires post in coordination with the Georgia Emergency Communications Authority to establish by January 1st, 2023, an amount of continuing education units for communication officers to complete annually. to my surprise and the surprise of many others, as a law enforcement officer, each and every year we were required to have so many hours of post-training. I know my friends in emergency medical services and firefighting were also required to do that. But one group that was left out, who I have no doubt wanted training and would appreciate it, were our communication workers. So this bill also takes post and gypstick and requires that they put together continuing education training for these communication workers who man 911. And Mr. Chair, at the right time, I would appreciate favorable consideration of this legislation by the committee.
Thank you, Senator, for that great presentation. We're going to hear from a couple of people, and we also have a video to view today. Let's first hear from our friends at GEMA. I know Mr. Nix is here. Come on down and please give us your perspective from the Georgia Emergency Management perspective.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, Michael Nix. I am the State 911 Director at GEMA and provide support to our 155 primary 911 centers that are operated by the cities and counties across the state. So yes, we are in favor of this bill and the language for continuing education for communications officers and directors. It comes from a bill that we introduced last year, Senate Bill 76. And what we're looking to do is to Senator Robinson's point, is to add continuing education units for communications officers. Right now, the only mandatory education or training for 911 call takers and dispatchers is an initial 40-hour week at the beginning of their career as a communications officer, and no required training after that. Most agencies have a training program in place already, but there's nothing that says that you need to. And so we're looking to be able to tighten this up a little bit and add continuing education units for communications officers, as well as in Section 3 of the bill, it adds required training for new 911 directors. We developed a course last year and have had 4 offerings of it already for new 911 directors, and this would allow the course for new directors to continue.
Let me thank you for your continued leadership in this area. And just a reminder, our Senate unanimously passed Senate Bill 84 the other day, which ties together for this, as well as our 911 dispatchers who joined the POAB. So thank you for your leadership. Are there questions for Mr. Nix? Okay, very good.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so Laura, is it Bracci?
Bracy.
Bracy. All right, well, I was trying to make it fancier than it was. Bracci sounds better, I'm just going to say. So.
Half the family goes by Bracci.
All right, and Miss Amy Hughes, why don't you come on and join us as well, because you brought a lot of great work to this effort. So please, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. We'd love to play this video for you to start. Would that be okay?
We'd be happy to watch your video. Our senators over here, you may have to crane your heads or move your chairs a little bit.
I don't think I'll have much to say after this.
Okay.
The evening of January 4th, our son Cameron at that time was 12 days old, and he developed a bit of a sinus infection. We didn't really think much of it. It wasn't too bad. He wasn't running a crazy fever or anything.
We were loading up the car to go to our doctor's appointment.
As I was about to close that door to the back seat, I just remember taking a second look. And he was purple. He was, the strongest color of purple that you could probably imagine. He's just blue, turning purple, gasping for breath. He can't, his eyes are kind of rolling back.
I'm gonna tell you exactly what to do. We're getting help on the way.
She starts guiding us through CPR.
Push down about 1.5 inches.
Okay.
Pump his chest hard and fast 30 times.
Eventually, he started to cry, started to whimper a little bit, and he came back.
Good job, little guy. I was in such a panic when we were on the phone with 911 that it was very helpful having that calm person on the line walking us through it when I kind of mentally was all over the place. The thing that probably shocked me the most was learning that the 911 dispatchers legally don't have to know CPR. I kind of just assumed that that was required for part of their job.
If we can increase TCPR if the skill sets of the dispatchers, if they're trained and can help coach through the callers, there's a 51% greater likelihood of survival for those who are receiving it.
Without a dispatcher on the other end who knew CPR and knew what to do and knew how to communicate it to a parent in the worst moment of their life, I'm not sure where our son would be.
So yes, I am Laura Bracey. I'm with the American Heart Association. First, I'd like to thank Senator Robertson for bringing this very important issue forward. And the AHA is asking for your support of Senate Bill 505. You know, studies show that 911 is often called for out-of-hospital cardiac arrest, but CPR is not often initiated. And this bill would change that. Telecommunicator CPR has been shown to increase the chance of survival by 51%. And we just think it's a common sense bill that Alabama and Tennessee have recently passed, and we want Georgia to pass it as well. So we're asking for your support.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Senator Robertson, for bringing this forward. For everybody in the room and everybody who might be watching online, this is what we all do this for, because this bill will save people's lives. With that, I'll open the floor to a motion. I have a motion to pass from Senator Anderson. I've got a second from Senator Summers. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All opposed, please say no. Passes unanimously. Congratulations, Senator. Congratulations, Amy, Laura. Thank you for your great work today. This meeting is hereby adjourned.